Hi everyone, welcome to part 2. Okay, my opponent has just played h3, which is prophylaxis against knight g4. So I continued with queenside expansion now, with knight a5, threatening his bishop, and winning it for my knight would give me another advantage in terms of the bishop pair. So he has to move it, and bishop a2 is what he played. And here I had a long think, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, which I could afford because the clock times were roughly equal again now. I've been playing quite quickly in the opening few moves. And we had a little over an hour left each, or thereabouts at this stage. And my initial plan here had been to play knight c4, either gaining a tempo on his queen or winning the bishop pair. If he captures bishop takes c4, then bishop takes c4. And Fritz likes this plan and says that bishop c4 instead of knight c4 would be even better. But then I saw something else, and it was this that was causing me to take my time. I've been in similar situations to this tournament in games against strong players before, where there were risky continuations, and I'd considered them but not played them, only to regret it later on upon deeper analysis. And what I played was a move that I wouldn't have played if I wasn't already a pawn up. And as I was calculating, my heart was pounding in my chest. There was a lot of adrenaline going and that kind of thing. He's the strongest guy I've ever played, remember. And in the end, I figured, why not? It's a club game. Why not be creative and have some fun? No guts, no glory, and all that kind of thing. So I played rook takes c3, which at worst I thought was equal, with good positional play as a result, and Fritz agrees. In hindsight, though, I've come to the conclusion that this was unnecessary, and simply knight c4, bishop c4 was a much better and more solid, more logical continuation. My thinking at the time was that I will have two pawns for the exchange, the bishop pair, the initiative, and give him double g pawns, whilst having unopposed central pawns myself, which I figured would be enough play for the exchange, especially as I should be able to block the only open file, the c file, with a minor piece on c4 or c5, making his rooks a far less potent force, and then march my pawns down the center in Petrosian style. I was trying to imitate some of my favorite players, and he accepted the sacrifice anyway, and the correct way, with queen takes c3, which is the only way he can do it and keep an advantage. If b takes c3, then black is well ahead. After knight takes e4, queen f4, knight takes g3, queen takes g3, and bishop e2, with a big advantage to black. Also problematic, instead of queen takes c3, is rook takes c3, because now comes knight takes e4, queen e3, knight takes c3, queen takes c3, and again bishop e2, and black has an even bigger winning advantage in this continuation. So, queen takes c3. Anyway, so now I have knight takes e4, and this is obviously my plan. And this wins the bishop pair, and gives him double g pawns, after a later knight takes g3. And my main inhibition about playing this whole line was that the move he would have now, queen c7, looked very strong, and I was fairly concerned about it, especially as my queen is unable to neutralize his queen over here on h5. And I thought that I'd be able to evict his queen one way or another with my minor pieces, and didn't mind if I lost a7, because I thought then his queen is completely out of the game, and I may be able to generate a kingside attack fairly quickly. And Jack himself said in post-mortem that he wouldn't have taken on a7 for that reason. The queen is totally out of the game. And as it turned out, he didn't play this line at all, and I'm thankful that he didn't, because it gets massively complicated and generally gives white a slight edge, although Fritz gives an objectively equal position after king f8 to protect the bishop, which is the best move here. If instead knight takes g3, and after queen takes e7, knight e2 check does look good, but after king h1, rook f8 is forced, if not on this move, the next one. Now rook c7 is good for white. So king f8 is better at this stage. And now knight d4, and it's objectively equal. And the knight is on a strong central square, and the threat of bishop e2, winning a pawn on f3, with my queen here on h5 after the rook moves. It's bishop takes f3, g takes f3, queen takes f3 with a strong attack. But yeah, so he moves the knight, and that stops that threat. And in this position, he's threatening bishop takes e6, where I can't take back, or he's got knight takes e6, winning the rook at d8. And here I would have many options. Among them, knight takes g3, d5, knight b7, bishop g5, and e5. And they all lead to really sharp continuations. Like, I won't go into all of them, but suffice to say, it gets extremely complicated. But with perfect play from both sides, white has a small edge in every continuation. And this line with e5, which stops any knight takes e6 ideas, is the sharpest. And I analysed them all in depth to try and find a way to refute queen c7, because if I could, then I could justify my sacrifice. But I couldn't find any clear-cut way to do it. We may as well have a look at a couple of possible continuations here after this move, e5, just so you get an idea of what's going on in the position. Fritz gives queen takes a7, which, Jack said he wouldn't play, but it's the only move that gives white any kind of advantage. Anything else and black has the advantage. So it has to be queen takes a7. And it doesn't matter now if I take his knight, because he's attacking my loose bishop on a6. So best play goes bishop b7. And now again, he only has one move that keeps the advantage, which is b4. And once more I have a few options here. Among them is knight takes f2, with the idea of playing queen g6. And white has to be careful about how he captures the knight here, if he wants to at all. Like, for example, rook f1 looks tempting with pressure on f7 mounting. But in fact, this gives black the advantage many moves down the line after knight takes h3 check. And incredibly, the best move for white in this position is knight e6 check, which forces f takes e6, and now rook f1. Where best play goes king e8, and now rook takes f2, and white is winning. So a better move, instead of the knight sack, at this stage, hold on, let's go back. Yeah, instead of knight takes f2, rook a8 is an alternative continuation. But white is still better after either taking the rook with his queen, which we'll come back to, or taking on b6 is also good. But best play goes bishop d8, queen b5, knight c3, threatening his queen, is playable, because if he takes it with his rook, I've got queen takes d1 check, followed by queen takes d4. But even that would only be roughly equal. But now he has bishop takes f7, and if I take with my queen, then he wins the knight on c3. And if I take with my king, then queen d7 check is strong for him. Better is knight takes b5, but after bishop takes h5, knight takes d4, b takes a5, bishop takes a5, white has a big advantage, and more so than if he had taken the rook with that other continuation before. We'll go back and have a look now. After rook a8 here, he can simply take with queen takes a8 check. Oops, hold on now. Yeah, queen takes a8 check. Now after bishop takes a8, best play goes rook c8 check, bishop d8, rook takes d8 check. And remarkably enough, I can't hold on to my queen here. because he's got king e7. Now bishop h4 check, and if queen takes h4, then knight f5 check is going to win the queen. So g5 is the best move, but now g4 to defend against queen takes d1 check. Best play goes queen takes h4, now knight f5 check, king takes d8, knight takes h4, g takes h4, b takes a5, b takes a5, and bishop takes f7, again with just a small edge to white, as in every line I looked at after the queen c7 move. So it seems he definitely could have refuted my sacrifice, although whether we would have found these lines is a whole other matter, and certainly very unlikely. But as I said, he didn't go down that road and played a different move instead. Okay, that's the end of part 2.